Okay, so now I want to move on to chapter 2 of my series on Leviticus. In chapter 1, we established that the main theme of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is the kingdom of God. That is his rule. It's a benevolent rule, but rule nonetheless over creation and its creatures. And it takes place in two phases. First, in creation itself, and then after, there's a kind of break, a disruption of God's kingdom in the covenant. And then the covenant consists of redeeming the world as God's sanctuary and man as his image. So here in chapter 2, I want to focus specifically on the sanctuary. And so what is a sanctuary? A sanctuary is a dwelling place for a deity. These are very, very common in the ancient world. You find them in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Canaan, other civilizations. Built places and invited deities to dwell there because they were earthly creatures and they needed a spatial temporal place within which to meet the deity, to serve the deity, and to receive benefits from the deity. The function of a sanctuary is many, but at least three that I'll mention. It's a kind of palace, because the deity rules from that place of his dwelling. It is a temple, because worship takes place within that temple, sacrificial worship particularly. And it is usually the seat of an oracle, or a place where man can receive a word, prophetic word from the deity about what he is to believe and how he is supposed to behave. In the Tanakh, there is a creational prototype of the sanctuary we find in the early chapters of Genesis. But after the fall of man and the degeneration of the world, then the sanctuary moves to a covenantal type. And so in the next couple sections, I want to talk about both of those. The creational prototype of the sanctuary, and then there's three different forms of the covenantal sanctuary. Okay, so in the part A of chapter 2, we're going to talk a little bit about the creational prototype. We all know in the Genesis story it says that on the seventh day God rested on the seventh day. The Hebrew preposition beh can mean on the seventh day. It can also mean in, and I'm not sure if I would stake my life on it, but there is certainly possibly the idea that God rests not only on the seventh day, but he rests within creation on the seventh day. You have numerous psalms and passages of the Bible that use the word rest to talk about God's indwelling of the sanctuary, his resting place, the place where he goes. In addition, once he rests within it, then that place becomes kodesh. The Hebrew word there is holy, set apart, different from ordinary or common things. Common things in Hebrew is chol, so it is special. The holy place is the place where Yahweh dwells, and what makes it holy is the fact that he is there. You get a little bit of that in the story of Moses in the burning bush. Take the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. How did Mount Sinai become holy? It's holy because Yahweh is there. And so as Moses moves within the sphere of his presence, he is moving into sacred space. In addition, he's moving into sacred time. That place is holy as long as Yahweh dwells there. So we have this idea of Yahweh's indwelling. We have this other idea that it brings about holiness. And of course, the gan, the Hebrew word garden, Eden, which is not a Hebrew word, it's actually Sumerian and has found its way into the Hebrew Bible, is the creational prototype of the sanctuary. And so I want to talk a little bit about that place. So in the first section, I want to talk about the sanctuary, the garden sanctuary before the fall of man, which we have in the early chapters of Genesis. I mentioned earlier that it falls into three sections that are very similar to the sections we find in the tabernacle. A most holy place where Yahweh himself dwells, a holy place where man encounters Yahweh, and then an outer court where the altar of burnt offering is. Now, in these early passages of Genesis, we don't have too much of a description of the most holy place. But we do know that when the man and the woman sin, they are sent east. That's important because the tabernacle of Moses is set up so that as you head east, you're heading away from the most holy place. So we get the idea that the man and the woman in the garden are considered, in the mind of the writer, to be in the holy place. And if we read the tabernacle materials in the book of Exodus, we find that the holy place has 3 pieces of furniture in it. There is the veil, which separates it from the most holy place. There is a gold menorah that is fashioned after the shape of a tree that provides light. And then there is a gold table, which also provides food, the loaves of bread laid out. And I should mention there is also a 4th piece of furniture, which is the gold altar in front of the veil, which burns incense throughout the day. These are literal things, they're physical things, they're in the tabernacle of Moses, but they also have a kind of symbolic meaning. The veil means the separation. Man cannot approach God directly. The gold altar is often used in the Psalms to signify prayer or continual communication with God, in exchange for which man receives light through the menorah and food. So we do have the idea that before the fall, the idea of the sanctuary is already there in the early chapters of Genesis. Much of the imagery of the tabernacle is there as well. Now, in the second section, I want to talk about the garden sanctuary after the fall of man. So again, the discussion about how man fell or what the generational consequences of that are, those are deep theological matters, and theologians take different positions on them. The biblical text does tell us that man fell, and it does say that the man and the woman were sent east. Now, if we're thinking in terms of the tabernacle, that would place them in the outer court. And indeed, that is where we find their children, Cain and Abel, at the sacrificial altar in the chapters that follow. So our tabernacle imagery is fitting in really nicely here. In addition, there are 2 cherubim guarding access to the tree of life. Those cherubim, there's not really an easy way to translate that word. They are like the sphinxes of the Greco-Roman tradition, bodies of lions, wings of eagles, head of human beings. They guard sacred space. And this is an indication that man is now barred from the holy place. Why? Well, because he's the opposite of holy. He is now sinful, and he can no longer approach as he once did. And that reflects the embroidered cherubim on the veil of the tabernacle in the days of Moses. In addition, it's arguable that the imagery for God prior to the fall is that of water, or the stream of water, or the life-giving waters, whereas after the fall, the imagery of fire appears, and that will remain throughout the remainder of the biblical narrative. Yahweh is depicted as fire. And water and fire are 2 very, very different images. One is an agent of life, the other is an agent of destruction. Not a bad kind of destruction, but a purifying kind of destruction. And that imagery will continue. We find the same kind of imagery reappearing in the New Testament. Some of the gospel writers, John particularly, will depict the Spirit in the language of water, streams of living water. If we go to the synoptics, Luke particularly, the Spirit continues to be depicted in the old idea of fire. After Cain murders his brother Abel, he is sent east of Eden, which will put him out of the sanctuary altogether. What in Hebrew is called Nod, the land of wandering. And that is an indication that man is now thoroughly estranged from God. He has no access to the most holy, the holy, or even the outer court. He is thoroughly estranged from God. And that gives us a picture of what the writer is doing in the early chapters of Genesis. He's using the imagery of the tabernacle, projecting it back into the earliest history of man in the garden, and basically telling a theological story of what has happened to man since the very earliest days.